What's up, guys? Let me know if the audio is good. I can turn it up, down, or whatever, but I got it playing back over here. Hang on. Close that off. Alright. So I got a few questions on Instagram asked, so I'll answer those. I can't stay too long today, but I figured I'd do a little impromptu stream, at least, while I had a few minutes. If you do want to get a question answered today, you can do a super chat, and I'll guarantee I can answer those. If you ask a question in chat without the super chat, might answer it. We'll see how it goes. Got this off the screen here. Let me see if we got any more questions real quick. Alright, so currently we got 5 questions. We have, what are some general exercises to increase stride frequency? Why do you sprint? What are some injuries that might occur in sprinting? Do you stop lifting weights for a period before races, and if so, how many weeks? And do you utilize supermaximal eccentric loading in season? Why or why not? If you want to guarantee get a question answered, drop it into my Instagram story before 3:30 here. Otherwise, we'll just go with these. I haven't streamed in a while, so it's been like at least a year probably, so I'm not too surprised that there aren't a whole lot of questions, but hey, it's all good. We've got to start somewhere. Give it just another minute here, see if anyone shows up, and then get started. I was going to go at 3:30, but I don't want to run out of time, so we can start a little early. All right, so first question here. what are some general exercises to increase stride frequency? Now, I don't know that there are any exercises specifically that can increase stride frequency, because we have to think about, what is the underlying things that relate to stride frequency. I mean, one might be your limb length. That's probably not going to change very much. One might be, um, how much, if you put a lot of force into the ground, your leg is probably going to come up a little bit quicker, might make your stride cycle a little bit faster, but can't really guarantee and say that getting stronger or producing more force is going to make you increase your stride frequency. I would say, there's a certain point at which you're going to hit where you're no longer going to increase, or you're not going to see a lot of benefit from increasing your stride frequency. You're going to see more benefit from increasing your stride length. I think there's a certain point at which you're no longer going to be able to cycle your legs any faster while still being able to produce, the requisite amount of force that you need in order to sprint fast. So I think you can do certain things to try and increase your stride frequency, like, maybe if you do some fast feet stuff, or if you go over wickets where they are a reduced stride length, so you're forcing yourself to cycle quicker. Maybe doing wickets like that could help with your stride frequency, but just because you increase your stride frequency doesn't mean you're going to run any faster, because if you're producing less force each stride because you're artificially increasing your stride frequency, that's not going to make you run any faster. So I would question whether or not it's something that you really need to focus on. And you might think, oh, everybody looks quicker than me, but maybe that's not the type of sprinter that you are. I mean, if you watch Fred Curley run, that dude broke 10 seconds. He ran 9.9, I believe, and he definitely ran 10.0. And his stride frequency is not crazy by any stretch of the imagination. He's a 400 runner, but he's really fast. Why is he really fast? Because he covers a lot of ground. He's efficient with his movements. It's not because of his stride frequency. He might have optimized his stride frequency and found the stride frequency that works for him, but just because one person is, moving quicker than you as far as their leg cycle doesn't necessarily mean they're going to run any faster. Now, there was some research that came out from Ken Clark and his colleagues where the limb velocity at touchdown, meaning how fast your leg is swinging through the air as your foot hits the ground, that is a determining factor of sprinting. So that's not necessarily stride frequency, but that's the angular velocity of your leg as it's swinging through the air and when it strikes the ground. How can we improve that? Well, getting stronger at low loads, so something like the Exogen system, where you're able to strap weights to your body without them bouncing around like ankle weights or a weight vest. They're really, they stick tight to your body. They're pretty light weights. Maybe that could help, where if you get stronger and then you try to transfer some of that strength into sprinting by using the Exogen system, maybe that's going to lead to you having a slightly faster stride frequency, or at least faster limb velocities as you strike the ground. And if we have faster limb velocities when we strike the ground, we're most likely going to run faster as long as everything else stays the same. So, because that goes back to the idea of, how hard you swing the hammer is how hard you're going to hit the nail. So if we can swing our leg faster and we hit the ground faster, we're probably going to run faster. Like I said, that doesn't mean you're increasing your stride frequency necessarily, but that might be a better way to go. And then you can see if that does increase your stride frequency over time as you improve your angular velocity of your legs swinging through the air. Things that come to mind are going to be hip flexors. The faster you're able to get your leg off the ground and initiate the next stride, that's something that might be able to increase your stride frequency. So definitely work on your hip flexor strength. Definitely work on your hamstring strength, because hip flexors and hamstrings obviously the glutes, but hip flexors and hamstrings are going to work opposite of one another. So as you swing the leg forward aggressively with your hip flexors, your hamstrings are going to have to decelerate the leg on the front side before they reverse back down to the ground. So by strengthening the hip flexors, the hamstrings, and the glutes, and then transitioning that strength into more high velocity strength, either through lighter exercises, through plyometrics, or through using something like Exogen, then that might be a way where you can improve your stride frequency. So I would look at that more, consider what you can improve as far as strength around your hips, and see if that has any role in either increasing your stride frequency, improving your angular velocity of your limbs at touchdown, or if it helps your stride length, and just kind of play with it from there. Also, like I said, you can do some fast feet type drills, but that's more just to get a general stimulus for your nervous system, not that tap dancing your feet really quick on the ground is going to make you run any faster. So keep that in mind. um, all right, what was the next question here? Why do you sprint? This is a pretty good question. Um, I find that a lot of people, either when they're done with high school or they're done with college, they simply stop doing their sport. They stop running track, they stop playing football, baseball, whatever. But with track, it's unique because you don't have to be on a team. You don't have to get signed to some major contract to continue to compete. And you definitely don't need anything to continue to train. But there's a lot of benefits that come from training, like staying healthy, like, you know, uh, having something that you can focus on, something that you can dedicate time to, something that you can work on from a personal level. As you are putting in time to try to run faster, you're going to go through, personal growth by doing that, because it's not always going to work out. And just like in life, not everything works out. If you continue to train, you have something that you can feel good about, like, yes, this is the thing that I like to work on, this is the thing I like to spend my time on. Say you have some trials and tribulations with your training, maybe you get hurt, those are going to grow you personally. And the more that you train, or rather the longer that you train throughout your life, the stronger you're going to be when you're older. And one of the leading causes of preventable death in old people is falling. How do you prevent falling? By having strong legs. What's a good way to have strong legs? To train like a sprinter. Personally, I do it just because I really enjoy it. I think it's fun. I think it's hard, but I see that challenge as something that's really enjoyable, and something that, like, it gives me something to work on outside of everything else in my life. Yeah, I may be trying to work on how to make money, work on my, relationships or personal development, but it gives me something to focus on that's just mine, that nobody else, you know, can take away from me. And that if I improve, say I go out and I PR, that's something that I developed on my own, and it's something that I can feel good about within myself. So I do it because I enjoy it. I do it because it's fun. I do it because I'm better than average at it. And for whatever reason, sprinting is the thing that I found to be the thing that gets me up in the morning, that gives me something to look forward to. Like, on a day where I don't train, like today, I'm like, what am I going to spend my time on when I have a period of time cut out for training? What am I going to do now? But when it's a training day, I know, okay, that's the thing I'm focusing on. Everything I'm doing, I'm trying to set up around that. I'm trying to be prepared for the session. I'm trying to sleep well for the session. And if you have an athletic goal that you're targeting or working toward over time, you're probably going to make healthier decisions. Probably going to eat less ice cream, drink less beer, those types of things. So there's a wide variety of reasons why you might sprint. I do it because I like it. It's going to keep me healthy, going to give me something to focus on long term. And because it's track and field, you'll always be able to compete if you want to. You don't need to be on a team, and it's really a great opportunity for people to, stay athletic as they get older and have something to work on. Next question. This is a good one. What are some injuries that might occur in sprinting? A lot of injuries. One of the challenges of sprinting is that a lot of people get hurt when they do it. I would say for me, the biggest injuries earlier in my sprinting career, my injuries were centered around hamstrings. Like in high school, my hamstrings were really weak, didn't work them enough, didn't train them in the right way, so I had a lot of hamstring injuries. Over time, as I continued to sprint, continued to build up how much, training I have under my belt, as I got my hamstrings stronger, they stopped getting. Oh, thanks for that membership, Tanya. I really appreciate that. As time went on, my hamstrings stopped getting hurt, and it shifted more to my hip flexors and my adductors, because I wasn't training those either. So I would say one of the biggest mistakes I ever made in my training was neglecting hamstrings, neglecting hip flexors early on. And those were the biggest injuries that I had. The other injuries you can get are going to be chronic overuse injuries, like maybe some Achilles tendonitis. It could be tendonitis around the hips, around the high hamstrings. Um, but those are going to be the main things you'll deal with, either a soft tissue injury like a groin pull, an adductor pull, a hip flexor strain, a hamstring strain, or something that's chronic overuse related like an Achilles tendonitis. I've dealt with some hamstring tendonitis. Those can be prevented by managing your loads and how much you're progressing your training. If you do too much training for too long, that's where those chronic overuse injuries are going to happen. If you do too much, say you do too much hamstring training on one day, and then you go out and try to sprint the next day, maybe they're too tight, maybe they're slightly broken down from that lifting session, and now you pull your hamstring. So the acute injuries you have to manage by managing your training loads, managing what days you have back to back, and the chronic overuse injuries, those you're not going to notice right away being a problem, but they can develop over time. So just to recap on the question, the main issues that you'll probably deal with in sprinting are going to be surrounded or centered around the hamstrings, hip flexors, adductors, Achilles tendon, hamstring tendons, maybe some adductor tendons. Those are the main injuries that you'll get from sprinting. Outside of that, probably not going to get a lot of back injuries, shoulder injuries, or anything like that, but it might happen. I got a cat trying to get in the door here, so we'll see what. I might have to let them in here because they'll let us know if they want to get in here. They aren't allowed. Next question from Instagram is, do you stop lifting weights for a period of time before races, and if so, how many weeks? In the past, I definitely have, but for example, I'm gonna race. I think I'm gonna race this weekend, and out of nowhere, I decided I'm gonna do some hex bar deadlifts. Worked up to some relatively heavy loads, and I found that the next day when I went and sprinted, I did feel a little tired, but I felt faster than a typical day. So the reason I bring this up is because you don't want to be lifting crazy amounts. Like, you don't want to be doing a lot of volume in the weight room when it's time to compete. You don't have to be lifting when it's time to compete, but there can be benefits that come from it, like being potentiated for your race by being, confident because you're strong and powerful, those sorts of things. So I do think there's benefit to lifting around your competitions, especially if it benefits you mentally or from a potentiation and tone standpoint. Like, I do better when I have some tone, whereas if I just laid out, slept for a week and then showed up to run, I'd probably feel a little flat. But you have to manage the volumes. Well, it just got super windy outside. You have to manage the volumes because that's what's going to kill your ability to sprint in a competition. You could do a heavy hex bar deadlift for 1 rep or maybe 3 sets of 1 or something like I did this week and not have it negatively affect you. But if you were doing 3 days of lifting where you were hitting, a good amount of reps on hamstrings, hip flexors, abs, glutes, a bunch of squats, all this stuff, and the load was really high from a volume standpoint, that's not going to allow you to compete at your best. So you definitely can lift close to your competitions, but the volume has to be reduced. And you also have to make sure you're not doing things that are causing a lot of breakdown, like a lot of eccentric work. So when I did the hex bar deadlifts on Monday, I picked up the bar and then I dropped it. So that way I wasn't undergoing a lot of that eccentric loading. So I'm not getting a lot of soreness and stiffness from it. I'm just getting the stimulus of lifting the load, and that's it. So that's something that you can consider doing. You don't have to cut out lifting. If you are going to cut it out, I would say, probably a couple weeks is enough time to where you'll still maintain that strength, but not feel like you're fatigued from the lifting that you did. If you go more than, say, 4 to 6 weeks without lifting, you're going to get significantly weaker. So you have to make sure that you're maintaining some amount of strength leading into your competitions, even if you take that strength training out the week of or the week prior. But personally, for me, some amount of lifting is good. You just have to be careful about what exercises you choose, the types of movements you're doing, like whether it's eccentric, concentric, isometric, or all of it. And make sure you're not doing things that are going to aggravate an injury. For me, I have hip flexor issues sometimes, but when I do moderate loaded hip flexor work, they don't bother me in practice. So that's another example of how, it might bother your hip flexors when you do a cable hip flexion exercise. So maybe you don't do it, but for me, it works, feels good. helps me be confident in my body. So I think it's good to keep it in there in my program. But if for you it makes you feel tired or something like that, you can leave it out. All right. We got one more from Instagram, and then I'll go to the chat here, so stick around. Do you utilize supramaximal eccentric loading in season? Why or why not? So if you don't know what that means, supramaximal eccentric loading means doing eccentrics at a load that are higher than what you can concentrically push up. So say you're squatting, a supramaximal eccentric would be, maybe you can squat 455, so you put 475 on the bar and you just go down. Typically, when this is done, people will use something like weight releasers at the bottom to where the load gets reduced at the bottom so then they can push back up. Whereas when they're going down, they're just resisting because it's more than they can push up. And then the weight releasers go, it's deloaded, and they fire back up. I personally haven't been doing anything like that because it's just a lot of load to go under, and I question whether or not that load is required, especially now I'm 29 years old. I got to be careful about what I do. If I cause an injury, I'm not going to recover from that injury like I did when I was 19. So I stay away from the supermaximal eccentrics, for one, because I don't really have a good way to do them, because I don't have a lot of training partners at the gym. I don't have the right equipment to do, say, something like weight releasers. And the cost benefit risk reward aspect to it is just not, it's not something that interests me at this point in time. So the simple answer is no, but it doesn't mean they're terrible or bad or anything like that. It's just, I think there's better ways to spend my time and energy than super maximal eccentrics, especially in season. All right, let me just make sure there's no more on Instagram. Got one more. My feet always strike way in front of my hip, a lot of braking force. Suggestions? If you're striking very far in front of your hips when you're sprinting, you're probably pushing back too much and staying on the ground too long, because what happens is if your foot's on the ground and your body's trying to go forward but your foot's still on the ground, your center of mass is going to have to lower a little bit, and you're going to run out of time if your foot's on the ground too long to get that leg forward and be able to strike the ground effectively. So I would focus on getting your leg off the ground sooner, get your foot off the ground sooner. Don't let it lag behind you. Don't try to push behind you. Just strike down, pick the foot up and strike down, and that will probably help prevent you from casting out and crashing forward into the ground. The other thing is just really working on, say, when you're doing drills, making sure that when you're doing A-skips or things like that, that you're not reaching forward with the foot and that you're putting the foot straight down. That's going to help prevent you from crashing forward into the ground and getting all those braking forces. You also have to make sure that you're dorsiflexing. So when you're doing those drills, when you're sprinting, having some emphasis on dorsiflexion will help get your foot off the ground sooner and also help prepare your foot for landing. Whereas if your foot is plantar flexed, it's going to be easier to crash forward because your toe is closer to the ground. Whereas if you get dorsiflexion as you're bringing that foot down, it's going to give you slightly more time to bring that foot under you rather than striking out in front of you. So to recap, get your foot off the ground sooner, focus on vertical cueing, like pick the foot up, set the foot down, and make sure that you're dorsiflexing, and those things will help prevent you from casting out and crashing forward into the ground when you sprint. All right, no more on Instagram. Let me check out the chat here. Thanks again, Tanya. I appreciate that membership. Anyone who wants to sign up for a membership, feel free to do so. There's nothing too crazy as far as rewards and all that, but I do appreciate it. It really helps me because this is my main thing that I do now, so I appreciate that. How would you go about increasing stride length? To increase stride length, you need to increase power. Pretty much, getting stronger and then learning how to apply that when you sprint is how you increase your stride length. So get stronger in the gym, and then as you're sprinting, make sure you're not rushing your stride frequency, especially in acceleration. When we're accelerating, we have to create momentum. We have to build up as much momentum as possible throughout acceleration, so that way when we reach maximal velocity, we have a wave of momentum to ride into the finish. If you just are too quick for what you're capable of, as far as your force production capabilities, that's going to hurt your stride length, and you're not going to be able to build up as much in your acceleration to a high enough top speed and have enough momentum to finish the race well without decelerating a lot. So I would focus more on, you know, getting strong in the gym while sprinting, and then when you sprint, making sure that you're not rushing your strides too much, allowing yourself to propel, allowing yourself to project off the ground and all that, and that'll probably help your stride length. Sleds are really useful for that, especially during early acceleration, so I would include some sleds in your training. I like to pair sleds with my lifts sometimes, and then sometimes I like to pair them on the track with block starts. So maybe you start by doing them, you do a deadlift and then you do a sled, or you do a squat and then you do a sled. And then later you can bring them into your sprint training, so you're doing a sled and then a block start, and then eventually you're just doing sprints without any added weight. But that's a way that you can progress, you know, from the strength-oriented approach to transferring that into sprinting. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Stephanie. You got another member. Nice. Appreciate you. Let's see. Patrick says, do you prefer Barry Ross's Underground Speed Secrets method for improving max velocity sprinting at 95%, or Tony Holler's Feed the Cats program at 100%? That's a good question. Let me get a sip of water here real quick. My throat always gets cooked when I do these live streams, so all 2 or 3 of them that I've done. I think for most people, especially if they're learning to sprint, staying slightly below 100% is probably going to help them in that they will be more smooth. They won't be, you know, fighting themselves and overdoing it. But I think we have to separate the intent versus the outcome. The outcome needs to be 100%. You need to be sprinting as fast as you can whenever you can sprint as fast as you can. But how we sprint as fast as we can is not always going to come as a result of trying as hard as we can. You know, if we want to deadlift a heavy load, we got to try really hard to do it. To sprint as fast as possible, it's not quite the same thing. There are some athletes who they have to, like, you know, just go as hard as they possibly can. But with some athletes, that makes them overcook their stride frequency. Maybe, you know, they'll drive their leg forward with their hip flexor, but because they're trying too hard, their glute contracts, and now that hip flexor movement, or that hip flexor driven movement, is not as effective because the opposite muscle, the antagonist, is pulling in the opposite direction because they're trying too hard and they're contracting too many muscles at the same time. So once again, you have to make sure that you're able to achieve near maximal or maximal sprint velocities in practice, because the intensities we reach in practice are likely what we're able to reach in competition. But how we get there is going to differ depending on the athlete. Some athletes might need to try to be a little bit more smooth to run as fast as they can, whereas someone else can just, you know, smash as hard as they can and just put out all the effort in the world, and that makes them run as fast as possible. So you have to figure out within yourself which type of approach is going to lead to your fastest times, and then do that. So the ultimate goal is to run 100% in practice, but that doesn't always happen by intending to do that. Sometimes we have to tone it back a little bit, especially in acceleration where we're focusing more on force than frequency. And then by allowing that frequency to build properly throughout acceleration, we can then be hitting 100% in our top speed phase. So hopefully that makes sense. I do think, you know, with Tony Holler's program, it clearly works for him, and it works for the athletes that he's had. Like, I forget the kid's name, but, you know, the one kid who ran like 10.4. It worked for him. He was a very good athlete, obviously, a specimen who, if you run 10.4 in high school, you're really good. Is that same approach going to work for someone who is, you know, 30 years old or 40 years old or even 25 years old after 4 years of college training? I don't know that. We'll have to see over time how that progresses for him. But I think you don't want to get too locked into your system or your way of doing things. Personally, that's my opinion. You want to be confident in what you're doing. You want to be, you know that, yes, this is a good way to train, while still being open to other things that might be useful. And with Tony, it just seems like his opinion is that that's the only way to train. I just don't think that that's the case. I think there's other ways to be successful. Training like his program, you can be successful, and there's other programs that might fit you better, and you got to find what works for you. Do I have a program for the 40-yard dash? I have some content on my website about the 40-yard dash, but I really do need to make a program for that. So I'm going to put that on my to-do list, my ever-growing to-do list, and try to get one out for you guys. How conscious should you be towards small muscle groups such as psoas and piriformis? When you're sprinting, not at all, but when in your training, I think they should be trained for sure. You should definitely train your psoas and your TFL and all the hip flexor muscles. You should for sure train them. Piriformis, I'm sure you can do some clamshells or different exercises to work those, but you shouldn't be thinking about those muscles when you sprint. You should be thinking about them when you're setting up your training program and making sure that they're being trained. But when you go to sprint, you shouldn't really be focusing on much of anything other than maybe one or two minor things, and really just be seeking the feeling of what it feels like to run fast. Do I train my tibialis muscles? I do some here and there. Like I'll do dorsiflexion with ankle weights on my toe, like hooked up to my toes, or a band, that sort of thing. Definitely for people who are new to sprinting, they should definitely work their tibialis a lot. Because they're going to get worked when you sprint, so you really want to prepare them for that load. So definitely work your tibialis, but as you progress, it might become less relevant because you'll develop good tibialis strength just by sprinting. But if you're new to sprinting, definitely want to train your tibialis. Definitely want to train your psoas, your hip flexors, all that stuff. Got an injured hamstring. Any ideas on ways to exercise without using my hamstring? No, I can do upper body, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So for one, you want to train the non-injured leg because there is some carryover between the injured leg and the non-injured leg. The other thing you can do is you can do blood flow restriction training. So if you're doing like, say you can do a standing knee flexion type of movement where you're just bending your knee using your hamstring but with no added load, you can do blood flow restriction while doing that, and you'll get the same type of adaptations that you would get as if you were using load. But because you're not using added load, you're not going to have much of a risk of re-injuring. But because the blood flow restriction creates some hypoxia in the leg while you're doing it, and it also creates a lot of blood flow rushing in once you take the blood flow restriction cuff off, that could be a good way to train your hamstrings. Other than that, I would try to do global exercises like if you can squat to a box with a med ball without pain, I would do that. I would do step ups. I would, get out on the track and do walking pace drills and do all that stuff until you start to feel that pain start to go away. And then you can progress the velocity of the movements. You can add a little bit of load when you're doing the blood flow restriction training on the injured leg. And then I would train the rest of your body normally. Like I would train your uninjured limb as you would normally, because you'll get some carryover into that injured side. So those are some ways that you can balance that. Elijah, you're correct. 95% speed does not equal 95% effort. That is correct. Hisham, I see you did not make it into the military because you're a slow sprinter, but I would just trust in the grand plan and trust in if it wasn't right for now, then you were redirected, and that's okay, So if you still want to do it, if you still want to get in the military, just keep training, and it should work out. But if things don't work out that way, sometimes we're meant to go down a different path than what we initially thought. So, don't get too down on yourself. It's all good, man, or ma'am. Let's see. Is running longer distances like 5K bad for sprinting? Yes. I would not suggest anyone run 5Ks if they want to be a sprinter. If you just want to get faster but you're not competing as a sprinter, then you can do whatever you want. But if you're trying to compete as a sprinter, I would avoid the 5Ks for sure. Do you think that ATG training helps sprinting? I think if it helps you have less pain, helps you be more confident in the ranges of motion that you can hit, and it makes you just feel better and more athletic overall, then it's, probably helpful. If you don't have any pain, if your ranges of motion are already fine, you take what you can from it. But he got a lot of hype lately. I think he was on Joe Rogan or got mentioned by Joe Rogan. Um, Clearly, there's something to it. I mean, he's he's showing that he's pretty capable as an athlete himself. So it's not a bad idea to try some of that stuff and see if it works for you. Just realize that um, I don't know. Sometimes things are hyped. Sometimes they're legit. He seems pretty legit. So try the stuff and see what happens. How do you get fast while being lazy? A lot of sprinters are lazy. Sprint, take a day or two off, go sprint again, take a day or two off. That's a good lazy way to get faster. Um, and we got, what would be a good training split for sprinting each week, and how should training change let's see, as the season ends? It's going to depend a little bit on, what you need to work on, but good training split for sprinting. I mean, I would look at that last video I put out. It's all about different ways to program. So that'll give you like 10 different ways that you could approach your program. But I do a mix of some days where I sprint, some days where I lift. Occasionally I'll sprint and lift on the same day. Take a couple off days. One day is going to be more acceleration focused. One day is more speed focused. Might throw a speed endurance day in there if I'm not competing and not getting a lot of speed endurance from competing. I'll throw in a speed endurance day. But it's pretty generic. you don't have to get too crazy with it, especially if you're just starting out. Let's see. How can I contact you? You could send me an email, cody@sprintingworkouts.com. I kind of suck at responding to emails, so just be patient. What's up, Liam? Liam was on the team with me at GCU. Let's see, best ways to time splits. I use a free lap, but you can also use the My Sprint app. So if you're using the My Sprint app on an iPhone, you can just set up cones 10 meters apart and then use the camera in the Sprint app to take your video. Then you can go in and plug in when you crossed each cone, and it'll show you your splits. But I use a free lap because it's really useful. It's expensive, but I won some of it in a sweepstakes, and then I bought the rest of it. So I got kind of lucky, but I would get a free lap if you can. Best way to time. Oh, I already answered that. I tend to lean back during top speed mechanics. What do you recommend to correct that? Well, Darvesh, I would say you want to focus a little bit on squeezing your abs and making sure that your rib cage is kind of pulled down. And sometimes that can help. It doesn't mean that forever you'll have to focus on that, but maybe for a couple weeks you focus on pulling your rib cage down, and that might help you get a little bit forward. The other thing is, if your arm swings are, too far back or too far forward, if your arm swings are all on the front side, it might cause you to lean back a little bit to try to balance out all of the masses of your body as they're moving around. I would also look at your legs and see, are you casting out too far in front, and that's causing you to lean back. I would look at that stuff while also focusing on keeping your abs engaged, and that should help. Stephanie, I have a hard time understanding what rate of force development is. So rate of force development, that's how fast you're producing force. So say you are lifting a weight and you pick it up off the ground and you're moving pretty slowly and you're not like ripping the bar off the ground, that would be a slower rate of force development. If as you pull the bar, you are moving that bar, you're producing a lot of force very early in the movement, that's better rate of force development. In sprinting, rate of force development would be, as your foot hits the ground, how much force are you producing in the first 100 milliseconds, or 80 milliseconds? That's going to be your rate of force development. It's not directly tied to how much force you're producing overall. It's just how quickly is that force being produced. And that can be worked on with some heavy lifts. that can be worked on with some plyometrics and then sprinting. Do you think vertical jumps, broad jumps has any direct correlation with sprinting? I don't think there's a direct correlation. I would say that if you're getting better at sprinting, your vertical jump and your broad jump are probably going to improve as a result. But that doesn't mean that improving your vertical jump and broad jump are going to make you run faster. They can be indicative of the underlying factors which make you run fast, but I don't see them as being causal in like improving your ability to sprint. Do you have any core exercises you like? I feel like people focus on abs too much. I really like back extensions, single leg back extensions, the reverse hyper. I also notice when I do depth jumps that my abs get really sore, or not really sore, but they get more sore than when I do other things. I never did a whole lot of like core training as far as like crunches and planks and all that stuff. I've done them, but I never focused on them as much as other people. I always felt like learning to engage your abs when you do deadlifts, squats, jumps, sprints, that can have a pretty good impact on your overall core strength. But like I said, you can also throw things in like back extensions, reverse hypers, and I think those are really good for you overall. Let's see. 6'2", 165, 315 for squat, 350 for deadlift, 200 for bench. What should I concentrate on? Darvesh, I would, find exercises that work for you. Like I was talking about the hex bar deadlift earlier. Maybe you do hex bar deadlift and you pair it with a sled at the gym. If you can't do that, I would just focus on keep working. Those big lifts are fine, but you also want to, like I said, work on your hip flexors, work on your hamstrings, and continue to sprint, and you'll probably see some improvement. I wouldn't say that Darvesh is weak. You can get stronger, but for your body weight, that's not that bad. So I don't think you're weak, man. There's plenty of sprinters who can't do those lifts and they run fast. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Like, not everybody is going to run their fastest by getting stronger. There are people, like, for example, for me, when I'm stronger, I tend to run faster. But if someone is more of a like lanky, fascial, I guess you could say, type of athlete, they probably aren't going to benefit that much from just grinding out deadlifts and squats, So you have to find what type of athlete you are. Maybe for you, plyometrics and sprinting are a better way to focus your time. You should still have some base strength training in there, work on those areas that might get injured, like your hip flexors, your hamstrings, your Achilles tendon, your calves, all that stuff, your feet for sure, but you don't have to go overboard with it if you're not that type of sprinter. Yeah, see, Darvesh, he runs 10:30. That's fast. So if you can run 10:30 and those are your lifts, clearly strength is not your limiting factor. I mean, maybe it is, but I just don't believe it. I think you're more of a speed and elastic type of sprinter because you're relatively tall, you're relatively light in your body weight, and you run a fast time. So you're the type of athlete who probably doesn't need to grind away in the weight room and can focus more on sprinting, plyometrics, tempo runs, and things like that, and you'll probably be better off. Let's see. You guys are funny. BDR 0418. I assume you were born on April 18th. High school 100, 200 runner, have bad hip flexor, hip adductor pain, soreness. Doesn't seem to go away. So I would do definitely do some hip flexor strengthening work, like relatively, a moderate load, 8 to 12 reps on the cable machine, just doing a simple hip flexor up and down at a relatively slow pace. And then over time, you can increase the load, reduce the reps, and increase the intensity of it a little bit. But you're going to have to take a little bit of time away from sprinting, or at least reduce the amount of sprinting you're doing. You really want to make sure you're not over pushing behind you, because if you're pushing behind yourself too much and you have hip flexor issues, those hip flexors are going to get over lengthened, and that's when they're going to get really pissed off. The other thing that's going to piss off your adductors and your hip flexors is if you're doing a lot of starts, a lot of acceleration, and you're firing out too low, you're going to have to go side to side with your legs, which is going to once again over lengthen those muscles around the hip, and that's going to piss off your body again. So you have to make sure that the sprinting you're doing, you're not going too low, you're not going side to side, you're not over pushing behind you. Instead, just kind of let your body go through the range of motion it wants to without forcing anything. Maybe reduce how frequently you're sprinting, and then bring in some of those hip flexor strengthening exercises, use some blood flow restriction training, and you should be able to rehab that hip. How can you strengthen your TFL? I strengthen the TFL just by doing a simple, lifting your knee up, flexing the hip with a cable or with an ankle weight. That's how I target the TFL. It's really extremely simple, but it's effective. Abu Bakr, I tend to run vertically with an incomplete push when leg goes backwards. Keep jumping. Come on, struggle. Explanation or tips? Well, not everybody's going to fully extend on the backside, so you got to keep that in mind. The pictures of people where they have their backside leg is fully extended with their foot on the ground, that's not everybody. So maybe it's fine for you. You do want to be tall, you do want to have an upright posture, but like I said earlier, if you're leaning back, you got to work on engaging your abs a little bit more to keep yourself in a stable posture. Darvesh, I'll be looking forward to watching those U20 champs. That'll be exciting. Let's see. What's up, man? Hey, what's up? Is that Blake? What's up, man? Joined last week. College coach said she had some money to spend, and I sent her the Genie in your video. Awesome. Yeah, I hope she does get it. Either that or buy a sled. The Genie is pretty useful though, especially if you don't want to like haul around a sled. The resistance is sort of inconsistent sometimes, but it's still really useful, especially for how small and lightweight it is to carry around. It's pretty nice to have. Oh, so you're from Mauritania, Darvesh? Nice. All right. What do you think of Olympic snatches for sprinters? Better than power cleans? I like power snatch. I like muscle snatch. The muscle snatch is where you're basically driving the bar up, and then once you get to here, you're basically pushing it up. I like that as an initial exercise to do because it helps you feel what it's like to push through the whole range of motion on that long bar path, and then get into power cleans where as the bar's here, now you're pushing yourself under it and working on that fast reversal under it. I think snatches are a little bit easier to teach. I think they're a little bit safer as long as you use a more narrow grip. So I use a clean grip typically, or just slightly wider than a clean grip. I don't go full snatch width. So as long as you're not going full snatch width and you're focusing on muscle snatch and power snatch, I think those are really good ways to, incorporate some moderate velocity lifting into your program. Not all, by the way, not all countries have teams where they, send them to a championship meet. So sometimes athletes will represent other countries because of that. For people who have longer torsos in comparison to leg length, are they more likely to have a harder time to maintain a proper drive phase? Drive phase is one of those terms that I think is thrown around a lot, but we'll just say acceleration. If you have shorter legs and a longer torso, you're probably not going to be able to accelerate as far into the sprint as someone else. You're probably going to be a little bit more stride frequency oriented versus me. I have a shorter torso relative to my legs. My legs are like someone who's probably 6'1" or 6'2", but my torso is like someone who's 5'8" or 5'9". So, and I come out to 5'11", 6 foot on a good day. So, those are some of the differences that you might see. Shorter legs are going to be more frequency focused, not going to be able to accelerate as far before they hit top speed for the average athlete, versus longer legs probably going to accelerate deeper, but not going to be as frequency oriented. What are your thoughts on internal hip rotation during acceleration? If there's excessive internal rotation of the femur, like if you're watching yourself from the front and you see your foot kicking out to the side a lot as your leg's coming forward, so as your knee's driving forward, if your knee drives forward and your foot kicks out to the side, that's a lot of internal rotation of the femur. I would pay attention to that and focus on strengthening your external rotators. But if it's pretty even as far as how much the leg goes out versus in, and you have good balance between internal and external rotation, I think you should be fine. What do you think of Nike and their new technology, the spikes that got banned? I mean, I get it why some people have a problem with it, but if everybody has access to the shoes, then there's no problem, you know? If they only release them to their pro athletes and nobody else can use them, that's where there might be somewhat of an ethical issue as far as the technology, but or if they're like $1,000 and nobody can afford them, okay, maybe that's an issue, but I don't know. I mean, I don't believe sports are fair. Like everyone talks about sports, oh, sports need to be fair. They aren't fair. I wasn't born with Usain Bolt's leg length and speed, you know. Is that fair? I don't know. I don't really care, but I'm just saying like sometimes I think people get caught up in that fairness debate and it's like sports are inherently not fair because we're all born differently and we're all born with different capabilities. So if using shoes that nobody has access to makes you run faster, that's a little unfair. But if everyone has access to them and, you know, then I see no problem with it. Let's find ways to run faster, you know. Um, Planning on running any meets. I might run this weekend at Chula Vista. I bought, so I assumed that the meet was on Saturday. I bought a flight. Then I saw that the meet was not on Saturday, so I had to cancel my flight. So I'm trying to figure out the logistics of getting there and everything, but I'll probably run this weekend. I ran at a Chula Vista meet a couple weeks ago, ran 10:93, so, you know, considering I haven't competed in like 5 years, not a bad place to be. But I do want to see those times come down because like yesterday I ran 6:94 in practice. If I could get down to 6:8 or 6:7 in practice, then I would see myself PRing in the 100. So that's ultimately the goal. So yeah, I should be competing next week, or this weekend, I should say. Lots of hip flexor issues. I would look back into the live stream a little bit ago, but you know, don't over push. Don't run too low. Like when you're accelerating, make sure you're not too low. If you're too low, you're going to be side to side with your legs. If you're over pushing behind you, you're going to be overextending, and that's going to cause issues in your hips. So, people get so caught up in training, eating right, few think about how important recovery is. Besides simply not working out, how do you recover? So, a couple ways. One is you got to manage your sleep really well. So I would avoid looking at screens within the, you know, half hour to an hour before you go to bed. You know, don't be, you could listen to something, but I would turn off your screens. Don't be staring at your phone. So that way you can get into good sleep quality. You can also do things like, you know, use a muscle stimulator after your workout. That can kind of help flush things out if you feel like that's what you need to do. Sometimes it's as simple as, you know, managing your training load so that your training load is something you can recover from within the time frame that you aim to then train next. So if you plan to train in 2 days, make sure that the training load you're doing does not prevent you from doing that. Make sure you have some carbs in your system, you know, before you train. That way you're not burning out all your muscle glycogen when you train. That's going to be harder to recover from. If you have trouble sleeping, you could try like a supplement like GABA might help you go to sleep. It didn't really help me, but some people think it helps. You know, a lot of it comes down to how your training program's set up, how well you're eating, and then things like making sure you're not staring at a screen right before you go to bed, so that way you can fall asleep and have good sleep quality. Also, if you have lights on, if you have a computer on in your room, turn the computer off. Make sure there's no flashing lights because that stuff will wake you up and it'll mess up your sleep. Optimizing sleep is going to be the best thing you can do for recovery. Other than that, sometimes a tempo run helps me feel better. Sometimes blood flow restriction and some circuits helps me feel better. There's all kinds of ways you can recover, but sleep is really the key, and optimizing your sleep. How to improve stride frequency? That was the first question I answered, so make sure to go back early in the stream. Tanya likes ice baths. Nice. You're more disciplined than I am. I never got into ice baths, but I do know a lot of people who feel like they're good for them. Nice. You got your outdoor conference meet next week. Be looking forward to seeing how that goes, man. Best of luck. Trayvon's 10:01 looked like a false start to me. I actually didn't see it, so I'll have to look at it. But I mean, that reminds me of that other race that Fred was in, Fred Curley, where he didn't false start, but the dude with him surely false started. I mean, I don't know how that wasn't a false start. So maybe it was one of those with Trayvon. But if he's at 10:01 with a clean start, then he's going to have probably a good year. Undertraining is better than overtraining. Yes, it is. You can always do more, but once you've done more, you can't do less. If you're out there training and you do 2 sprints, you could do another one. But once you've done 6, you can't go back to 3, right? And whatever you did, that's the stress that now you've imposed on your body. So start with less, find what works. If you're not improving, you can try to add a little bit, but for sure, undertraining is better. Thoughts on kids 12 to 14 lifting heavy weights to gain speed? So this is a good topic. I think if you do too much heavy lifting too early, you have nowhere to progress. So I think teaching kids how to move, teaching them how to do lifts is really good. Exposing them to some strength training is definitely good. But 12 to 14-year-olds should not be grinding away trying to get a 1-rep max. That's just, I don't believe that is relevant to them if they want to run fast and if they want to progress throughout a long period of time. If they want to continue to train through college, after college, they're better off leaving the really heavy grinding type lifts, if they ever do them, to later than doing them at that age. I'm not saying that they can't strength train. I'm not saying that it's unhealthy to strength train at that age. What I'm saying is the type of lifts that you do need to be less focused on max load and more focused on either learning how to do the movement properly, learning how to move like an athlete, rather than just maxing out and all that. Let's see. Speed work, speed endurance, lactic endurance. 5 up. I don't think you're doing it wrong. Just make sure that the loads you're undergoing are something that you can recover from. As long as you can recover from it, you should be fine. I do think that 4x150 with 2 minutes rest, if you're trying to run them fast, that's going to be really hard. So if I ever do 150s, if they're not at a tempo pace, like 50% effort, then I need a lot of rest. I need like 15 minutes between them. So that's where I would question, what are you trying to get out of that? What event do you run? But I mean, ultimately, it seems like you're doing some good work. Parents say Ben Johnson, quick to get their kids on weight. They should really have been having them sprint. Yeah, I mean, I just think if you're trying to run fast when you're younger, you should just focus on sprinting and some basic lifting, but nothing crazy. Abu Bakr, I'm glad you got answers. Rep ranges for power versus speed endurance. Well, when I think of power, I think of more like the weight room, whereas speed endurance, I think of on the track. So for power exercises in the gym, I'd say 2 to 5 reps is probably the optimal range. I know Boo Schexnayder likes to do sets of like 4 or 5 in their Olympic lifts because you do get a slight buildup of lactate, which can help with your hormonal status and help with your recovery. I do kind of like going, say, 4s for if I'm doing a lighter Olympic lift. I like sets of 4. but you could go as low as sets of 2, as high as sets of 5, but 3 to 4 is probably an optimal range for power. For speed endurance, I typically do like 2 to 4 reps. So I do a full warm up, make sure I'm ready to run fast, and then I run them as fast as I can, 95 to 100% effort, and do 2 to 4 reps, and that's a pretty good speed endurance workout. Maybe I'll make a video on the 100-meter fast walk. Tips for someone getting into sprinting later in life, late 20s or early 30s. Just manage your workloads, manage your expectations. Start with doing a good solid warm up and then some acceleration work, maybe 20s and 30s or something like that. And then you could have another day that are more like 40 to 60 meters where you're getting more into speed and speed endurance. Keep the reps, the number of reps lower, like maybe 3 to 5 reps to start, moving up to 4 to 6 reps on acceleration work over time. Speed work, 2 to 3 fast sprints on that day. Speed endurance, if you're going to do it, which you don't really need to if you're just starting out. But if you get into speed endurance work, once again, 2 to 4 reps, maybe 70 to 120 meters, something like that. I would just say if you're getting into it for the first time, only sprint a couple times a week, and when you sprint, don't do too much. That way, you're not going to get shin splints and cause issues. So this is for you, B Signs 15. Make sure that you're managing the loads and not doing too much, so that way you can progress over time and build up. Say over the course of a year, you build up your program. Just be patient with it. Don't rush it. You can improve a lot without a lot of training, especially if you're fresh to sprinting. So don't worry about how much you're doing. Focus more on moving well. Learn about like my video on the basics or fundamentals of sprint technique. Watch that. Learn how to sprint before you focus on adding a lot of load. Worst mistake a sprinter can make in their training, doing too much. That doesn't mean training as a sprinter is not ever hard. Don't get me wrong. It's way easier to do too much. It's like anybody can throw all kinds of training into a program. Not everybody can throw in an optimal amount of training. Daniel MM. Initially, you'll be slower, but you'll have a better capacity to improve over time. So like Elijah said, you will be faster once you get back into sprinting, but there's going to be a period of time where you just have to know, because I haven't been sprinting, I'm probably not going to run as fast as I was before, but you have a better foundation now to build upon, and eventually you probably will run faster. So don't worry, just get back into it when you can. Trust in that as you build up over time, it'll improve and you'll be good. Supination at contact. I think supinating into ground contact is natural, and it's what the body's going to do because it's going to supinate at the initiation of ground contact, then it's going to roll into pronation, and the foot's going to come off the ground. If you don't supinate, it's going to be hard to pronate. It's not that you need to focus on like, I have to supinate or I have to pronate. It's just that those things are going to happen naturally. Now, obviously, if someone never pronates and they only supinate, or they only pronate and they suck at supination, then there's some weaknesses in the foot and the lower leg. But if there's over supination, I would work on things where, say this is your foot, I would work on things like band exercises where you're lifting the pinky toe, lifting the side of the foot to engage those muscles that are antagonizing supination, and then just keep training and it should work itself out. But yeah, foot strength, ankle strength, all that stuff. Make sure you're working inversion, eversion, internal and external rotation, dorsiflexion, and that should help solve the over supination issue. Think of just balancing it out. You want to train the lower leg in a balanced way, and it should fix the supination. If it doesn't, then you have to start looking at, okay, is the athlete more in tune mentally with the outside of their foot, and they have to work on being more conscious of the inside of their foot? Maybe they do little hops focusing on the inside of their foot to get more comfortable with that point of contact. That's another thing to suss out, is like, is it a strength and tissue issue, or is it a mental coordination issue? So, is it worth it to gain weight if you can maintain strength to weight ratio? Weight gain and weight loss should happen naturally as a result of your training and eating enough or eating optimally. I wouldn't try to gain weight, but if you gain weight and you're getting stronger, I wouldn't worry about it. Tore my ACL playing football, surgery next week. Tips for getting back into sprinting post-op. Work on, once you're able to get back into it, some slow drills like walking A's, walking dribbles, things like that. If you have pain after your surgery, once you're good to start exercising and everything, some blood flow restriction stuff might be useful, because blood flow restriction is not only helpful for improving the adaptations to your training, but it's also helpful for reducing pain. And if you have pain, that's going to inhibit your training, so you can consider that. But I would just, go through sprinting ranges of motion, but at walking speeds, and then build up from there. Another concern I have, kids U12 to U14, optimal competitions per season. Maybe something, I don't know about how many competitions, because I don't know about your schedule and how many competitions you have access to. Like this year, we're pretty limited on how many meets we have in the States, so that affects things. But in a normal year, you could compete 2 weeks in a row and then maybe take a week or two off, and that might be optimal, just because then they get some back-to-back competitions, but they also have some time to decompress from that, focus on training for a while, take some pressure off themselves, and then go back to another 2-week cycle of competition. That might be a good place to start. What should my 100-meter time be if I can sprint 10 meters per second? And is 10 meters per second achievable for most men in their early 20s? I think for most athletic men in their 20s, 10 meters per second is achievable. If you can run 10 meters per second at top speed, you're probably running low 11s. Somewhere in there, maybe 11.3 or something like that. Yeah, like Peter, for example, he runs same speed and he can run 11.8 in the 100 and 51 in the 400. It depends. Yeah, exactly. Like you might run 10 meters per second at top speed, but your acceleration is really good, so you're going to run a faster 100. Or maybe your acceleration isn't that great, you're better at top speed, so you're going to run a mid 11. That's gonna have an effect too. Having pain in my wrist, any substitute for cleans? Hex bar deadlift jumps, sled sprints. Let's see, you could do a high pull, where you're not catching. You could do a no catch hang clean. There's a lot of options. You could do leg press even. Like as long as the load is optimal for power output, you could do any exercise really. There's nothing that's like magical about Olympic lifts. It's just they're useful because of the nature of them. Elijah, you split 289 for fly 30. If you run a legit 289 for fly 30, you'll break 11. So as long as that time's legit, you should be running like probably 10.9. Yeah, medicine balls, exactly. You could do med ball throws. Those are probably not going to aggravate your wrist too much. Just launching a med ball as far as you can, forward, backward, that sort of thing. Yeah, if it was on a free lap, I think you should break 11. Like, for example, last week, or let's see if I can bring it up here. Let me look at something real quick. So I record all my times, and a couple weeks ago I ran 1093, and leading into that I ran a 293, a 295, versus when I was running a couple years ago when I got down to 281, I ran 1066 in that same practice. So, I think you should break 11. When doing starts, what components do you focus on to get a 45-degree angle? block setup. So your blocks have to be in a position that you're able to come out of, and then you have to be powerful enough. Any cons off the top of your head doing triphasic training? Triphasic training is like how I started. So just be aware that it's easy to look at that program and think you have to do every possible thing in the world and fit everything into that program and do all kinds of exercises. You can take the concepts of triphasic, pair that with, reasonable loading relative to what you're capable of right now, and you should do pretty well. Just don't be doing the eccentric phases when you're trying to run fast, because they're going to crush you for a period of time. Then you'll recover, and then you'll be stronger and you'll be fine. But just don't think that you can do the eccentric phase and then go compete that week and expect to run fast. Yeah, that Greg Smith thing was pretty irritating. I still get people messaging me saying that I should sue him, that I should tell Athletics Australia. I don't want to cause conflict. I almost didn't even make that video, but I felt like something had to be said. But I just wish the guy would make his own damn programs. IPH Visuals, are you going to compete? Yeah, I think I'm going to compete this weekend. I competed twice so far or 3 times so far this year, 1093, 2218, and that's after 5 years of not competing. So I think I got some good room to progress based on what I'm seeing in practice and all that. My goal is to PR, so trying to run faster than 10.6. Thanks everyone. I'm off. South Africa, it's 126. Yeah, definitely get some sleep, Tanya, but thanks again for becoming a member, and thanks for being here for the stream. I look forward to more interactions, more questions coming later. I finally got this streaming set up to work, so to where the internet's good and all that, routed an Ethernet cable, so hopefully we'll be seeing you around soon, but definitely go get some sleep. Possible to buy personalized training programs from you? Yeah, I'm just starting to do some of that. I did it for a while, and I had issues with how much the person expects relative to how much money they're paying, relative to how much time it takes me to make the program to be worth the money and work that all out. But I am open to doing personalized training programs with people if that's what they want. You can email me, Cody@sprintingworkouts.com. We can talk about that. What do I think of PEDs and sprinting? I would say don't use them, first of all. That's my first piece of advice. I think there will probably always be issues with people using drugs in sport. I think there's questions as far as, how they go about preventing people from using them, whether or not it's fair at the top levels as far as are all the people who are said to be clean, are they clean? I don't know, but I would just suggest not going down that route because there's a lot of risks involved, both to your body. You don't know where the stuff's coming from. There's risks to, obviously, your career. You can get banned. There's risks to your reputation. And I just don't believe that they're necessarily as effective as we're led to believe, to where I think a lot of people, if they were to use PEDs, they probably wouldn't improve as much as they think they will. And so that risk reward just does not work out. I think it's too risky. And this is not an ethical judgment on someone who has done it. It's just that I don't think it's the best way to go. I think you're going to feel better about yourself if you take the natural route. And I think that, it's just, you're going to be less stressed out. You're not going to risk putting something in your body that's really bad for you. And you're not going to risk your reputation if you stay clean. So I would suggest stick with the natural route and things will be better. Solid numbers. Where do you compete? Arizona and California mostly, but I'm open to some meets in Texas or New Mexico if they show up and they're close enough. I read that Charlie Francis used to have his sprinters focus their arm swing forward while on the blocks. I've done that too, and it does seem to help a little bit, but I've found that with cues, any cue that I use doesn't work long term. Like they work for a little while and then I have to find something else. So use legs forward for a while or use arms forward for a while. And then once that doesn't seem to work anymore, go for something else. Got your first meet on May 7th after 5 years. Any tips for mentality? Just, I would say, first of all, Aiden, be thankful that you're able to compete. Be thankful that you're healthy enough, that you're alive, that you have the opportunity, because there's plenty of people who didn't make it through this year, didn't make it through today, woke up today and didn't know this would be their last day on earth. So my first thing is to say, go out and enjoy it and be appreciative that you can. Other than that, try to execute one part of the race well, whether that's your start, whether that's progress or like staying patient in your acceleration and continuing to build up momentum throughout the sprint, whether that's getting up into a good posture and trying to be relaxed at the back half of the race. Find something that is like the one thing you can work on that race, focus on that, and then let the time be whatever it is. Whatever the time is less relevant, because if it's your first time competing after 5 years, similar to me, you will improve from there. Like it's almost guaranteed that you'll run faster as you continue to compete and train. So don't worry about the time so much. Just focus on one thing that you can work on and then see if you can execute that in a race situation. See what you can learn from it. And above all, be happy, be thankful, and just enjoy the environment. It's fun to go to a track meet and be in that environment, be around people who are athletic, meet people, see people you knew from before, all that stuff. So try to take something away from it like that. Tips and drills and doing the first 3 steps in your starts. Start is a little sluggish. Just make sure you're being as forceful as possible. Try that. Just try to produce as much force, which is going to feel slightly slower, but project, build momentum. You don't get there by spinning your wheels and tap dancing. You get there by launching and launching and launching faster and faster and faster. So focus on that in your acceleration, on launching off the ground, and then see what it looks like. See if you can, wrangle it in from there. I feel like PEDs give a placebo effect more than anything. Yeah, I was talking to someone who coached a really high-level sprinter who got banned, and they said that once they came back and they were training again after their period of time off, that it was hard for them to reach the same feel that they had before. So they had to do like a lot of heavy squats to recreate that really intense feeling that they had when they were on juice. So I think there is something to be said for what you're saying, Elijah, where they give a placebo effect of maybe a feeling, but that feeling isn't necessarily indicative of running any faster. Come to Texas, it'd be awesome. Yeah, definitely. I'd like to. I just need to find one that's, that I can get into and all that, and fly when the prices are right. Does resistance running create less stress on the body because you're not moving as fast? That's something I've thought about. It depends if it messes up your ground contact mechanics and you're crashing into the ground or anything like that, that would probably create some issues. But if your mechanics are good and you're running slower, it might be less stress. It might be less, nervous system stress, more muscular stress. It's a hard question to answer, but it's definitely a line of thinking that I like that your wheels are turning in that way, and I would, keep thinking about it, but I don't know. Yeah, like what Peter's saying, there's more load, so you have to work harder. So in that regard, there might be more stress. Whereas doing a top speed workout with a weight vest, I don't know. It's tough to suss out what the answer is. Being confident and mindset is half the equation for sprinting. Yeah, if you have the physical capabilities, like, for example, my start at my last race was really, just really weak. But then my start in practice that same week and the week following was really good. So physically, I'm there, but mentally, recreating that in a non-practice environment, that's the mindset and confidence side of things that has to be locked in for you to achieve your best. Let's see. And we're already an hour and 20 minutes. All right. We'll give it till 4:45, so a few more minutes here, and then I'm going to shove off. But I'll do more streams because I got my setup working now, so I can do this more often. So if you guys do want me to do more live streams, then definitely I will. And by the way, I want to say thank you again to the 2 new members of the channel. I do have channel memberships now. Just so you all know, during that time where I made no videos for like a year, I was working full time. Then I went back to California to help my dad during the time where he got his kidney transplant. So I was doing a lot of construction work. Now I'm back, and this is the main thing I'm focusing on. So I quit my job, just focusing on this. So you guys don't have to spend any money on any of this stuff, but just know that if you do get a membership, it does help. So, or if you do a super chat, if you buy a program, all that stuff helps because then I can focus more on creating content as opposed to trying to find ways to make money. So I'm not here to get rich off you guys, I promise. It's just being open and letting you know this is the main thing I'm focusing on now. So the memberships and all that really do help. What do you think about training through injuries? Better to take time off? So I think it's better to do as much as you can that does not aggravate the injury, but don't keep aggravating the injury. So if sprinting keeps aggravating the injury, you have to find non-sprinting ways to train. But if you just do nothing, you're not giving your body the stimulus to repair, to heal and all that. So you do have to train. You just have to find ways to train that don't hurt it. So maybe it's training at a slower speed. Maybe it's training in different movement patterns, getting away from sprinting, but doing things like lifting and drills and those sorts of things. So keep that in mind. General thoughts on time off, trying to gain time progression and peak at 22, 28, say. If you start at U12, it's a lot of work. Yeah, it is a lot of work. Rest cycles are really important. So in the Bondarchuk training system, for example, athletes who did not take a rest cycle of about 4 weeks off each season tended to just stagnate the following season. So if you're having issues, might want to you could take a season off, or maybe you just take a season where it's focused on being less load overall. But I definitely would agree that it's really hard to train from 12 years old to 28 consistently and stay healthy, stay motivated, unless it's a very unique individual who's very driven intrinsically. So the first thing would be to guarantee that there are like a month off each year so they can get completely away from training, just focus on whatever they're doing in their life, and then come back and focus a little bit more on training after that. But if you have someone who's really, really struggling and that 1 month off is not helping them, maybe they need to take more time off. Where would you place hurdle jumps in a speed session before intervals, between intervals? I'd either do them paired with a sprint, so like do a sprint and then a hurdle jump, or after the session probably. Mr. Trackman, you'll be 80 in June. See, this is what I'm saying, guys. You guys can continue to train as long as you want if you have the mindset, if you train right. Mr. Trackman here is 80 years old. None of us can say, oh, it's time to throw up the spikes because I'm too old or anything like that. There is no too old. So this is a perfect example of someone who can, who has trained over a long period of time, and that's just awesome. So first of all, thank you for the motivation. Second of all, let's see. 80 in June, hope to set an age record if you can break 70-10 in the 400. I can get to the 351, but I usually do 19.5 in the 100, or in the last 100. How can I lower that last 100 to 19? So part of it is probably, being able to maintain your technique as you're really fatigued. That's something that is really hard in the 400, but if you can maintain some stride length and not get too, shortened up in that last 100, just maintaining bigger ranges of motion, trying to stay disciplined with that technique, that's what's going to help maintain you through that period. The other thing is you could possibly do, I don't know, I'd have to see what your training program looks like. So if you want, Mr. Trackman, you can send me an email, cody@sprintingworkouts.com. I'd be happy to look at your program and see if there's anything from a programming standpoint that could be worked on. But definitely focus on maintaining nice open arm swings. That really helps me at the end of a 200, is getting my arm swings to be more open than what is normal or what feels normal. Maybe that'll help you. But shoot me an email with your, what your training program looks like, or a video, and I'm happy to help you out, man. Liam, thank you for the super chat, man. How much is it to become a member? Are there anything members get? It starts at $1.99 a month, so basically $2 a month, and then it goes up from there. The main things are, once there's a few members, I'd like to do some members-only live streams. I'll also share the link to all my videos of exercises. They're not like super refined as far as like super good quality on every video, but it does give you a huge library of exercises that you can have access to. Let me hang on 1 second. I'll grab the old link here. Make sure this doesn't. All right, so just to recap on the memberships, for $1.99 a month, you get extended cuts of videos. So like that last video I made, which was 16 minutes long, members got a 45-minute version of it. Might be a little more rambling in there, but if you want more content, it's more content. I have a members only live chat option. So as we do more of these live streams, eventually, if it gets popular enough, it'll become members only. For $5, you get access to the exercises playlist. For $10, you get 50% off training programs. For $25 a month, you just are wanting to give me more money, and happy to work something out with someone if they go that route. But those are the basics. Here's the link for member. Elijah, thanks for being here. I'll definitely stream again. So we'll keep this up. We'll do this as a regular thing. But thanks for being here. Thanks for asking questions and interacting in the chat. I really appreciate it. It does make a big difference. And if it weren't for you guys, this wouldn't be a thing. I wouldn't be here if there was none of you to watch and ask questions and all that. So I hope that the content helps you guys, but without you, this wouldn't be a thing. So I sincerely appreciate all of you. Regardless of whether you ever spend a cent or not, just being here I really appreciate it. Thanks, Liam. I appreciate you being here. Hopefully I'll run into you sometime too, before we get too old. I don't know if you're still out here in AZ or not, but hopefully I'll run into you. Your opinion on what to do in the weight room during in-season. It depends on the person, because like we were talking earlier, some athletes are going to be more elastic and less strength driven. Other athletes are going to be more strength driven. Some athletes might have an injury they have to work around. If you're strength driven, you're healthy, you can do heavy sets of, singles where you drop the bar, like on a deadlift, for example, you pick up the bar and drop it to work on some concentric strength. That's fine. You could do some moderate load Olympic lifts. That's fine. Some depth jumps and all that. It's more about finding what doesn't aggravate issues in your body and doing things that put you into a good state of readiness to train. And that's going to depend on you more than, the exercises themselves. It's different for everybody. All right, these are going to be the last couple questions. And then I'm going to head out. Let's see. How to increase the amount of force you put into the ground as a sprinter. I'm a beginner. Part of it is just learning what it feels like to be forceful. So attacking the ground, like imagine that the ground is trying to, kill you, and you got to smash the ground to make sure it doesn't kill you. That might be one way to go. You could sprint with a sled, and that can help teach you how to produce more force. I'm working with a sprinter who he's getting back into it after taking a few years off after high school or during high school, and now he's out of high school and he's trying to get back into sprinting. So he needs to work on force production, and he really likes sleds. So I would try sleds, and then also just mentally being more forceful, being more aggressive, and focusing on projecting off the ground, and that might help. Trying to improve acceleration for baseball. How good are bounds? I would focus more on just doing acceleration sprints where you're focusing on projecting off the ground and building up momentum, more so than any specific exercises. You can also do acceleration bounds where you're doing like an acceleration type movement, bounding from a standstill to maybe 20 meters. But there aren't really like best exercises. It's more about sprinting with good technique, maybe doing some sled sprints with good technique, and then weight training to support all that. Liam, if I run any races in Dallas, I'll definitely hit you up. So thanks, Blake. I appreciate you being here. You've been a very loyal supporter, man. I appreciate you a lot. All right, guys and gals, I'm going to shut it off here. So thank you all for being here. Greatly appreciate you. This was a very quick hour and a half. It went by quite fast. My throat is a little cooked, but not too bad. So I'll be back. Also, I don't know if you guys play video games, but I've been getting into some Age of Empires lately, so I'll be streaming that on Twitch here and there. So if you want to join in on that, you can get in there. But anyways, I appreciate you all. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for being here, and I'm out.